Hello, and welcome to the Path of Maximum Resistance, this little vlog I've been doing for the past couple of days. I think you've made it to episode 3 now. And today I will be telling you the story of my friend Joe, which is cool. First of all, I want to acknowledge that I've increased the production value of this project tremendously. As you can tell, I've turned the camera around, so you're no longer looking at my messy condo. Instead, now you can see California behind me. That's actually Pacific Coast Highway. I've also committed to turning off my phone. I noticed my other videos, it was buzzing all the time, and that's super annoying. And yeah, the production value, if I said I increased it, I'm actually totally kidding. I'm not going for anything professional here. I'm just trying to have a medium to talk. And if the viewing isn't great, it is what it is. I have a little light right here. I don't really know how to do professional lighting. That's why my face is all dark, and it's not what I'm going for. It's not the priority. So it is what it is. In any case, in talking about Joe, the reason I'm choosing this topic today is because it's about a person. Obviously, it's about one particular person, but the breadth of our friendship and how it all worked out kind of addresses a big spectrum of topics. It allowed me to talk, obviously, I met Joe through the Army, so it allowed me to talk about the military. I'll be able to talk about some of the hijinks I got into in South Korea, including a minor international incident. I can also talk about a special operations mission that was like kind of top secret and crazy, of which I had like this big, almost the most insignificant participation in, but I was there enough that I can talk about it, and it actually ties very prominently into the story of Joe. As the story sort of culminates, they'll bring us to more present day, and though I won't talk about politics, I'll be able to address sort of the derisiveness of politics and the division that we have in our country and how that's affected me personally. And like I said, I won't actually talk about the politics themselves, but I think we'll be able to address it in a way that's a little bit different, kind of fascinating, and hopefully entertaining and thought-provoking for all of you. It'll also allow me, like I said, we'll talk about South Korea a little bit, some crazy hijinks. Maybe I'll get to talk a little bit about like my small town upbringing, because that kind of related to how Joe and I sort of why we had a bond. And I think it's a cool story. So with that, let's get to it. All right. So here's where we'll begin. So we will start with 3rd Infantry Division, my first unit I was in the Army. If you've been following these episodes a little bit, you know some of this. I'm gonna try not to retrace too much of the stuff I've said before, or else we'll just be here all day. But in any case, so I was in the 3rd Infantry Division. I kind of mentioned I was in a reconnaissance unit that hadn't really done a whole lot of reconning, and we were rolling into Iraq. So this is back in 2003. I want to kind of put you in the time zone of when we were, the time period of this story, at least at this point. It's 2003. It's during the invasion. I'm in this pseudo reconnaissance unit. Basically, at that time, we're just hanging out with the brigade headquarters. We hadn't really seen a whole lot of combat. We had called in some artillery at the very beginning of the war, and actually that's overstating it. We actually were co-located with some artillery that was firing the actual first rounds of the war, and that is a story I want to tell you one day about this reporter on Fox News named Greg Kelly, who he should be ashamed of himself, as my hero Stugatz from the Dan Le Batard would say. I have some stories about that guy. Yeah, but anyway, so the war started. So here we are, rolling north. The only other combat we had really seen, I think at that point, maybe we had encountered the Mortarman. I had referenced an episode ago where we had taken him out, but nothing too significant. It was what it was. We were in our Humvees, just kind of rolling straight north. So I think this is about the time of the sandstorm I had mentioned. Really nothing significant. I'm just trying to kind of put you in the time zone. It's the first couple weeks of March, or late March, first couple weeks of the war, just doing our thing, right? So we get to kind of a point, we're coming close to the Karbala Gap, which is another story one day I'll tell you about, which was, quite frankly, one of the scariest moments of my life as far as trepidation goes. As we entered the Karbala Gap, that was something different, because we thought for sure we were going to be chemically attacked. In fact, our unit was so sure of it that our brigade chaplain came over the brigade net and actually prayed for all of us before we passed through. Just kind of setting that story up, planting the seed for a future episode. But so we get up there, and our platoon is tasked out. So, retracing, there had been a battle, mostly a tank battle that we heard about, and actually it had been raining and it had gotten kind of muddy and dirty and slick. And some of our tanks and our equipment, though I wasn't in a tank, I was in the Humvee, some of the 3rd ID's tanks and stuff were getting bogged down in the mud, and it was a rougher going as far as the climate and the environment was concerned than maybe we had anticipated. Anyway, so we were kind of settled down, and the mission tasking that our platoon was given was to go find these people and go rescue and evacuate them. We weren't really told much about it. Now, I want to be really super clear. Our platoon was tasked with that. My truck didn't actually go on the mission that I'm about to describe. And this is interesting. My dog is here. You can't see her. Maybe you'll see. Oh, you see her in the shadow? That's Rue walking around. But my platoon was tasked on this mission to go up to this tank battle and go rescue these people. It was very ambiguous, and no one really, my platoon wasn't giving a whole lot of details of what was going on. Again, I never want to overstate what I did, my own participation. My truck actually didn't go on the mission. We kind of hung back. So my buddies in the platoon, they went up ahead and they were going to rescue these people or evacuate these people. And as the story goes, as I understand it, they get up there, and I ended up seeing the remnants of this later on, like later that day as I caught up to the area. There had been an actual tank battle. Like, 3rd Infantry Division had fought some mechanized infantry from the Iraqi military. Like, there was an actual armor, maybe not armor on armor, but like armor on mechanized infantry battle. So like real deal war, right? And as I understand it, basically the guys in my platoon, they had some dudes with them in their trucks who were going out to evacuate their teammates. And so these guys in their truck, in my friend's trucks, were like, hey, pull over here. And like, you have to imagine this situation. There's tanks kind of stuck in the mud. You could see like remnants of where like close air support had dropped ordnance. Like, it was a war zone. It was an actual battle zone. And I guess what had happened is, you know, the people in this truck, in my friend's truck, would jump out of their vehicles once they got to the battle zone and would just start like yelling their buddies' names, like Joe, and like getting on the radio and being like, Joe, you know, like, we're here. And more or less, these dudes like dug themselves out of the ground. So I know this sounds crazy, but basically, as I understand it, what had ended up happening is this unit, which was the 18th Airborne Corps LRS, LRS being Long Range Reconnaissance and Surveillance. And I don't even think that unit exists anymore, or maybe it does, I don't know. But it's a mission set that was really big during Vietnam, and then there was a Ranger mission set that had gotten kind of minimized in modern day, and then there was just a very few people that still participated in this unit. But so they did, and the story is that they had actually been in Iraq, participated in like reconnaissance and setting up the battlefield before the war even started. And they were like in Humvees, on foot, just very light. Like, when you think of special operations, secret, top secret, crazy missions, this is like that. This is like the example par excellence, or however they would say it, the prototypical mission, special operations mission. This was it, right? These Corps LRS dudes had done it. They had been in Iraq, you know, with no recognition and just doing their thing. And when this tank battle had started, obviously they're, you know, in trucks or on their feet or wherever the case might be, they like literally buried themselves in the ground, or they found like shacks to live in. Like, their existence sucked. And I can confirm this because when my platoon evacuated them, though my truck didn't do the evacuation, I ended up meeting those guys, and when they got pulled out of the ground, dude, they looked bad. Like, we hooked them up to IVs. They were just like gaunt and just exhausted. Like, you could tell that they had seen some stuff. Like, they had done some real fighting and just some real surviving for who knows how long. So that was crazy. Like, but at the time, I didn't think a whole lot of it because, like I said, my truck didn't really participate in the mission itself. I was just kind of like, I can't think of the word I'm looking for there, but I was just kind of on the side and just like a side participant in the events. But it stuck with me. Like, I really like. I remember thinking about those dudes, being like, those are some special guys, and like I really admire their mission and what they had done. So anyways, this is 2003. I'm with 3rd Infantry Division. The war continues. We do our thing. We never see those dudes again, right? Like, they go and do their thing. We didn't even know what unit they were in. 18th Corps Lurs at the time didn't mean anything to me. Like, I didn't know who they were. As far as I knew, they were Delta Force. Like, whatever. So we continue with our mission. Everything happens. Whatever. In the interim, I could tell you a bazillion stories. Of course, I'm not going to, but we go and take Baghdad. Well, 3ID does, which I was part of. Whatever. We end up on the edge of Fallujah. Our whole tour ends up. We end up going back home. We're at Fort Stewart. Things happen. When I get back to Fort Stewart, this is where I could go on for days, and I will at some point, and tell you about, like I referenced, like I got in trouble. I went AWOL. I did some like drinking and driving, some things I am really not proud of. I used to underage drink in Savannah all the time. I got arrested a lot, just did crazy things. And maybe the most intriguing part of it all is I kind of always, like, I was one of those Teflon people where I would get in trouble, but somehow things would always work out for me. And I'd always find my way through, and like I would get in trouble, but then like the conviction would never happen. Like, to be honest with you, and this is a story I'll elaborate on some other time, like I got a DUI in Savannah. I was like 19 years old, and I got not just a DUI, I blew like .27. Yeah, bad news. At like 19, really irresponsible, just awful. But I never ended up actually getting it on my record because I ended up deploying to Korea and then back to Iraq, and the district attorney in Georgia, or in Savannah, actually wiped it away and never ended up pursuing it, thankfully. Though, I mean, I deserved the punishment. I did the crime. It was bad news. And I'm going to tell you, there's going to be an episode where I talk about all of my sort of immature stupidity and all the things that I did with alcohol that, man, were awful. And I need to sort of tell them because I'm not a person who can sit on my past and just like hide it. I need to be upfront about it, and then by telling those stories, hopefully convey to you that I'm a changed person. And it's just like when I go to an employer or a potential employer, I think everyone else, or not everyone, but a lot of people take the tact of trying to always put themselves in the best light and act like nothing bad has ever happened in their lives. For better or for worse, I always kind of take the approach of, this is me, these are the things I've been through, these are the things I've done, but I've learned from them, hopefully. And part of that is the motivation for doing these vlogs, right? Like, I want to get the stuff out there because by expressing it, I build on top of it, and hopefully I become a better person. But there is one of these crazy incidents that will be significant to today's story and to Joe, who I promise, getting to. So I get to Fort Stewart, get in a lot of trouble. Luckily, somehow, some way, I come down on orders for South Korea, as I was just kind of alluding to, which was crazy because it never happens. You don't change stations when you have a 3-year tour. Like, it just never happens. So I honestly think that, like, I was getting in so much trouble in Fort Stewart, someone who had some pull saw something in me and said, get this kid out of the States. Like, send him somewhere where, like, he won't ruin his career at 19 years old, like I was trying to do. Because not only did I come down on orders for Korea, like, I left in, like, a week. This never happens. Like, that's not how the military works. So, I get to South Korea, right? There I was with a unit called 217 Field Artillery. As I alluded to before, in a previous episode, the platoon I was with at the time, both in Fort Stewart and then in South Korea, at least originally in South Korea, was a combat observation lasing team, a COLT team, which is, for better or for worse, well, I shouldn't say for better or for worse, but for accuracy or inaccuracy, is considered like a reconnaissance unit, though we never really reconned anything. But that's the unit I was in. It was a platoon where we would kind of do scouting, and we would call in artillery, supposedly up ahead of like the forward line of friendly troops. So that was the platoon I was in. And South Korea, I gotta tell you, like, there's been few times in my life, and this might sound sad, and if it does sound sad, I would ask you to please go back to the last episode, episode 2, where I talk a lot about like depression, alcoholism, PTSD, and maybe that'll give some context to the statement I'm about to make. But South Korea is one of the few times in my life where not only was I happy, but like I knew I was happy at the time. Like maybe I might have wrote home and said like, blah, 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 like it sounded a little sad, because at times I was homesick. Like you're in a whole different continent, right? But for the most part, like I was enjoying life, and I knew I was enjoying life. Like I could drink, which to me at the time was like priority number 1. You could drink underage there. I was kind of left to my own devices. There was all kinds of sort of, just things to do in South Korea to keep a young soldier occupied, I guess is how I'll put it. Like I really enjoyed it. I had a good time. In fact, maybe too much of a good time. So I'm with my Colt platoon. And one day, again, I'm going to have an episode just talking about those kids in South Korea, that, at least at that time, that was a place that was like the Wild West. We used to see super senior leadership would be passed out outside the base. We'd carry them in. I'm drunk. Into the barracks. We would do things in the barracks that were just embarrassing, super immature. I mean, just imagine you have nothing, like a barracks full of 19-year-old testosterone raging, just alcohol fueled kids just doing insane things. So we find out in South Korea, that our brigade is going to deploy to Iraq. And so it is what it is, right? And so we had like I think a 30-day field exercise prior to deploying to Iraq, where we were going to prepare for Iraq. We lived out in the woods, or out in this big base in South Korea where they simulated what it would be like being in Iraq, and so on and so forth. So we did that right prior to deploying for 30 days, maybe even longer. It was probably the longest field exercise of my life. And right before we deployed, we had a little bit of free time, and as soldiers will do, we went out seeking trouble, right? So here's the international incident of sort of whatever. This, now, unlike the special operations story I told you a couple minutes ago, where I was a very insignificant participant in the story, this one I was potentially a very significant participant, though it's kind of cloudy. You'll see. So we were out, we were partying, we were doing our thing. In fact, I will tell you, for those of you who have any familiarity with South Korea, or where the U.S. Army is situated up in Camp Casey and Camp Hovey, outside the gate of Camp Casey, which is the main base for 2nd Brigade 2ID at the time, were a lot of bars and stuff like that. But that was kind of like the gate outside of Camp Casey was okay. Like you could get in trouble there, but like that's where people partied, no big deal. Where our unit was stationed was actually Camp Hovey, which is like this back corner north of Camp Casey, and then outside that gate was considered the back gate, and like that was the really seedy section. Like if you went out the back gate, you were looking to have a good time, but you were probably trying to get in trouble. Like your night wasn't going to end well. You were probably going to bust curfew, and you were up to no good. Needless to say, I hung out the back gate pretty often, as I was on this night. So we had done our field problem. We're getting ready to go to Iraq. We had some free time. Now, the story gets pretty cloudy here because, in fact, it legitimately is cloudy. Like, I don't have great comprehension of what actually happened. But the short of it is that the group I was with caused vandalism to a South Korean national's vehicle. A spoiler got ripped off the back of a car. as I remember it now, and I'm not even kidding, like, as the event happened, I legitimately was blacked out. Like, I don't remember what happened. And it's not in my nature to do something like that. As crazy as I wasn't the person who would, like, normally do that type of thing. I would party hard, but I wasn't, like, the instigator, right? But as time has gone by, I seem to remember that I may have been the one that ripped the spoiler off that car. But I might also just be filling in the gaps in my memory. I'm not sure. Maybe someone who was there might come across this video and be like, no, it was you. I don't know. So we ended up in South Korean jail. Like, real deal South Korean jail. Yeah, the army, so the U.S. Army actually had to, like, come and, like, negotiate us out. Not, like, crazy espionage. The president had to, like, get on the phone and do a code red and, like, evacuate us. It was just, but, like, it was a big deal. It sucked. We got in trouble. It was what it was, but we were getting ready to deploy, so, like, there wasn't a whole lot of time to punish us, right? So, I ended up meeting with my field artillery first sergeant, about to accept my punishment. And one of the unique things about my situation at the time is I was one of the very few people in South Korea who had combat experience, or at least combat experience in OIF 1, just because the way it worked out, like, I got back from my first combat tour, I immediately PCS'd to a new station, and that station immediately went to Iraq. Like, that typically didn't happen. So there was very few people who had combat experience. And maybe that worked in my favor because, and that's the reason I mention it, is because I think, like, people had sympathy on me on occasion, maybe more so than they should have. But so I meet my first sergeant. I think I'm going to get in a lot of trouble. And basically all he says to me is, here's what we're going to do. We're sending you to the infantry. Wow. So I get kicked out of my Colt platoon, which, like, I liked being in my Colt platoon, right? And I didn't really want to go to the infantry. Like, that was a pretty harsh punishment. And as I kind of mentioned before in a previous episode, the way I looked at it is that was kind of like sentencing me to death. Like, I really thought the light infantry was going to have a really awful mission in Iraq, and, like, the potential for me having a bad time just increased significantly by switching units. And I'd come to find out that that was actually pretty much the case. Though, man, I do have a story to tell you one day that, as fate would have it, switching units actually saved my life because, it's crazy. My truck that I was actually a sergeant, so I was a team leader at the time, and the truck that I was leading actually, yeah, like, I'm just gonna allude to that and leave it there and tell you that if I would have stayed in that unit, wouldn't have been good. But anyway, so I get sent to the 1st of the 503rd Infantry. I'm not there for very long before we deploy because, like I said, we're getting ready to deploy very quickly. I mean, one of my very first days there, actually, it was at night, and so I remember this perfectly, and I hope I can set this scene adequately because it was amazing. So we're sitting in this big parking lot in South Korea. It's all these infantrymen, none of which I really know. I'm one of the FOs, and if you're an FO in the infantry, you're kind of an outcast in a way anyway because you're not an infantryman. It's kind of dumb. But I had some respect because I had that combat patch, I guess. So people were like, okay. And plus I was a sergeant. Like, I don't know. Whatever. No one was really bothering me. So we're sitting in this parking lot, getting ready to load up into trucks. I'm not sure if we were going back on the field mission or what we were doing, but it was like one of my first days in the 503rd. And just like my head was everywhere, it was nuts. Now, so we're in this parking lot, and just imagine, it literally like this. You see how it's kind of like shadowing over my face right now in this camera view? That's how it was in this parking lot. It's nighttime, there's lights, but they're casting shadows over everyone. So, like, you just see silhouettes everywhere. Just everyone is a silhouette. And I'm just kind of sitting there. I think someone was asking me, like, one of the junior soldiers was like, what's going to happen in Iraq? Tell me a story. And so I'm telling Iraq stories, stuff like that. And we're just sitting there, like, we're literally sitting on the curb, on the street, right, just waiting to get picked up. I'm telling my Iraq stories, and I think I'm getting bolder and bolder and starting to, like, tell my stories with more vigor or whatever. And suddenly I see, like, this silhouette of a man start approaching me, and, like, he's stomping, slowly walking. And this dude, I'm talking, like, big old shoulders, like, no waist, and just, like, crazy looking dude is just approaching me. And like all I see is darkness, just shadows, right? And he just looks like an insane dude, and like the Incredible Hulk, and he's in the infantry, and he's coming right towards me, and I don't know his rank, and I'm just like, oh no, what'd I do? So this dude comes up to me, and he's like, the hell you know about Iraq? And I look, he has a combat patch, and I'm just like, oh no, like, maybe I've shot my mouth off, I told like too many stories, and like this guy's just, I mean, I was telling the truth, but this guy, I just knew I was about to get called out. And this guy just looked like he was ready to just murder someone, and I was going to be that victim. So I just start blurting out the first story that comes to head, and it's that same story I just told you. I start telling the story about like our unit evacuating these Corlers dudes. It's just the story that came out, right? And this guy, he's just this demeanor, just as I'm telling this story, he starts sort of changing, and he looks at me. And like, as you can probably kind of imagine is going to happen, lo and behold, he was one of those dudes. Like this guy. And so tying it back to where this whole vlog started today, that dude was Joe. So that's how I met Joe. Big Viking looking dude, like fire tattoos on his arm, on his forearms. I'm not going to tell you his last name. Just because in case I say anything that he doesn't want me to say, I don't know. I don't know that he was roided out of his mind, but he was one of those guys who's built like he was roided out of his mind. Just boom. Crazy blonde hair, just whatever. And yeah, so he was one of those 18th Airborne Corps guys that had been dug into Iraq that our unit ended up evacuating. And because of that, like, we bonded right away. And, like, he was actually super cool. Like, his whole deal where he was stomping up to me, like, I think he was legitimately kind of, like, going to exert his authority. But at the same time, he's kind of, like, he was a cool dude. So, like, he wasn't going to do anything. And I gotta tell you, like, I'm going to do a lot of myth building when I talk about Joe. Because I super admired this person to the point that, like, I probably made up a character that didn't really exist. And I knew this. Like, when we went to Iraq, I ended up being like, and I know this, like, I'm not ashamed to say this, and I kind of knew it at the time, I was almost like Joe's, like, little tag-along, I felt like. I so admired everything about this dude that, like, I wanted to emulate him, and to the point that I was kind of like a fanboy, and I'm prone to that. Like, I do that. When someone is, like, special forces qualified or outside the military, super intelligent, I get kind of starstruck, and I just kind of, I like grab onto their leg, and I'm like a puppy. It's sad in a sense, but it's also like a survival instinct. I try to inherit their better traits. And all throughout my tour of Ramadi in Iraq, I was like that with Joe, and I know that. The story was with Joe, and I don't know the truth of all this. It's all what he told me, and it could be fake, it could be true. I don't know. To me, the stories he told me were helpful. Like, I believe them because I want to believe them. Like, apparently he was in the Special Forces qualification course. He left it when the Iraq War started because he thought the war was going to be quick and he didn't want to miss combat. And if you knew his demeanor, you could believe that. The thing about Joe, he was renowned within the unit. I'll tell you, first of all, he was a really good shot. Super good shot. He had that experience that everyone knew about. He was well respected within the unit, especially by the junior soldiers. Basically because we all had that mythology about him. And I can tell you, even amongst, like, senior soldiers, he had reputation as well. One day, this is actually in Ramadi, in Iraq, we were just, like, we're actually on our base. We were conducting oversight. Like we had an entry point into our base where every single car that went by our base, we would check. And I was hanging out with Joe, just, like, chilling. And, you know, we have radios on us, so, like, people are talking on the radio all the time, but not often the colonel, like, the battalion commander. And so, like, the battalion commander is someone that you hold in, like, high deference, I guess is the word I'm looking for there. And you address them in certain ways. You use, like, their official title. You call them sir, and, like, very professional. And I'll never forget, I was hanging out with Joe, And the colonel comes on the radio, and normally, like, if he wanted, well, the colonel would never want anything from me, right? Like, but if he did, he would be like, send Sergeant B up or something like that. The funny part about this, and just kind of goes to convey some of the respect that there was for Joe, is that on the radio, the colonel was like, hey, can you send Joe up? Which was so crazy. Like, the colonel calling this E6 by, like, his first name just was crazy. And it ended up being, I don't know, it was some sniping mission that Joe got sent on or something like that. Insane. So yeah, so one of the crazy stories. So some of the things I wanted to talk about when I started this episode is I wanted to tell you about that crazy mission that where we evacuated Korlursk. I wanted to tell you about the crazy stuff we did in South Korea and getting in trouble with the South Koreans. But then there was also a mission in Ramadi, and maybe this will tell you a little bit about what it was like actually fighting in Ramadi, because this is a great Joe story, and one that I actually wrote up his award. I was one of the many people who wrote up his award that he was ultimately awarded for this mission. The way our missions in Ramadi typically worked is that our company of like 4 platoons, I think, 4 platoons, whatever, something like that, maybe 5. 3 of the platoons, 4 of the platoons, all but 1 platoon would be on foot. We would walk through Ramadi, and our mission was basically to knock on everyone's doors and gather intel. And beyond that, the mission was actually movement to contact, which is a very like fancy military way of saying that more or less we would just walk around the city, and I don't want to overstate it, but we were basically trying to get shot at because it was the only way to draw out the enemy. So imagine that existence. For like a year straight, you just walk through the city hoping to get shot at and like fighting back. And to make matters worse, we never walked down or very rarely did we walk down the streets because they were booby-trapped. Like, there were so many bombs on the streets that you couldn't walk them. So we actually walked through the backyards of everyone in Ramadi. And separating most yards in Ramadi are like cobblestone walls. And we would literally climb every single wall to get over. It was so tiresome. Imagine we did this like every single day. So like every couple days you'd be in the mission where you were in the trucks. And the reason you had trucks was for like resupply. You would have like extra water and batteries for the radios. And also we had the big guns in the trucks. So if things got crazy, you know, the trucks would come up and bam, bam, bam. So that was a typical kind of course of our missions. And my job in particular, like I said, I wasn't an infantryman, I was an FO. And during my second tour of Iraq, I only actually called in fire twice. I actually got to do really cool FO stuff once, where I actually got a map out and like got a grid and called in. We actually called in close air support. That's a story for a different time, which was amazing. That was like my forward observer like dream. Got to do it once. And I think there was another time I did some FO type stuff. But for the most part, to be honest with you, I was like a glorified radioman. I would hang out with the platoon leader, and I would more or less, I had like 100 radios on me. I had not 100, but like 4 or maybe even 5 different radios on me, all the batteries. And like I took a lot of pride in that, to be honest with you. Like, it's not, amongst like infantrymen, being the radioman isn't the most respected position. But for me, it was cool because like my commander, my company commander, like he actually deferred to me all the time. He would never ask for the lieutenant, our platoon leader. He would always just trust my ground truth and like would run with it, which wasn't true for the other platoons. So that was like a big deal to me. In fact, my commander, who I respect like mightily, ended up writing a really cool letter of recommendation for me after I left the military. And he addressed that too, just saying that like I was one of the few radiomen where he didn't have to like, actually, every time he wanted to know what was going on with his men, he didn't have to talk to the actual officer. He could talk to me. But again, like that should be the case. Like I was a sergeant. I had a little bit more rank. I should have been responsible. Like I was just doing my job. That's the way it should have been. But it's a source of pride, right? Any case, so we're on one of these missions where we're walking through the city, and more or less, like in Ramadi, you would occasionally get in firefights, but it'd mostly be like pop shots here or there. And like if you got into a firefight, like maybe you'd send some rounds down, some rounds back, and it would just be over in an instant. Like our biggest concern was IEDs, and we lost dudes, and it sucked, and I saw some crazy things, and it's sad. and those stories might come out one day. I'm not sure what purpose they'd serve in telling them other than my own therapy, but I'll probably tell them one day. You might not want to watch that episode. But that was our biggest thing, was like IEDs. But on this particular day, and the left time is gone now that I can kind of name, I don't know, things that were not secret, but operational security back then. But for those who were there, this will be very familiar because it was a mission that occurred on Route Apple. And yeah, I think anyone who watches this who's in the 503rd will know where I'm kind of going with this. All of the streets in Ramadi, like, we knew Ramadi intimately. We used to travel around. The way we navigated was with satellite imagery. Like, we'd have photographs of the city, and like, I could tell you, like, I could literally point to any house on this photograph and be like, oh, this dude lives here. I mean, to a point, right? Like, I don't want to exaggerate, but like, we knew the city super well, especially the eastern half of it that we own. The Marines own the western half. And then all the streets had names, like Route Michigan, Route Apple, Route whatever. Route Apple was this diagonal street that went kind of from like our base in Ramadi, and it kind of cut up towards the hospital, which is in the northern part of Ramadi. It's cool, like, if you go on Google Earth, and sometimes when I'm having my nostalgic moments, I do this, and I look at Ramadi and I kind of reminisce about what it used to be like. And as a digression, I was actually on Snapchat last night checking out videos from Baghdad, and I'm not even kidding, it like warms my heart to see that like people are living at least pseudo-normal lives in Baghdad. Maybe not so much in Ramadi, but anyway, so yeah, Route Apple. We're doing our normal mission. I don't even remember how this sort of all transpired, like how it all initiated, but we got into contact, and it was crazy because this was not how it usually worked. But in this case, like, the enemy was super well organized. Route Apple actually had like barriers set up. Like, the enemy had set up barriers which had like not trapped our trucks, but kind of got like, you know, I said there's always one platoon of vehicles. Like, the vehicles, I think, got to a point where they couldn't really turn around. It was almost like not as extreme as Black Hawk Down, but if you envision that scenario, that's what this was sort of like. And then on top of that, they started dropping mortars in the city, and they were like well placed. They were tiny, like little mortars, because they were landing and like impacting near us. So this was just crazy chaos. I mean, to the point I have my radios, like, some are monitoring the company net, some are monitoring the platoon net. Like, I turned one on the platoon net, and I literally hear someone scream, like, not like they were hurt, they were just like freaked out and they were screaming. So I like turned it off, and it was nuts. I'm talking back to the commander, and so we get to this point. So basically, I'm here, and this is kind of me. This is me being with my gun, right? I'm like kind of leaned up against this building. I'm like talking to the radios. There's a truck here. I'm not going to mention this dude's name, but our buddy on the gun, he, I think this is like his first engagement, and I literally saw this. He's up on the 50 cal, like with the butterfly triggers, and he's just like, do. But I'm looking at him, his eyes are closed, and like his rounds are hitting pretty much in front of him, and they're sending shrapnel everywhere. And like, he actually, the shrapnel, I think, hit one of our buddies, like, not like seriously injured him, but like, he was just like, it was crazy. But that's not really a bad thing about him. That's not to say anything detrimental about him. It just goes to tell you how like intense the situation was. So I'm against this wall, like the lieutenant's up near the truck maybe, or maybe he's behind me, I don't remember. I'm looking over at the dude in the truck, and then there's a street, there's like this street, and there's fire coming down the street, right? Like I was telling you, the enemy had like set up barricades and stuff like that way down the far end of the street. And then across the street was more of our guys. Like I was telling you, one of the dudes got hit with like some shrapnel and stuff. So we had a dude who was kind of like shot. Not kind of, like he was legitimately shot. He was injured. And then near me was Joe. And this is so, like, I swear to you, I'm not making this up. This is 100% true. And maybe this isn't as cool as it sounds to me. But at the time, it was the boost I needed. So we're sitting there and like, this is scary. This sucks, right? But at the same time, it was awesome. Like this is what we signed up for, right? So we're there. Like, I remember that. Like, I remember being like, this is like, I remember all of this perfectly. Like, I was scared, but I was like, this is awesome. So we're there, we're doing our thing. And so these dudes are hurt. And like Joe's like, well, I'm gonna go over there and I'm gonna like help these dudes out, like the guys across the street. So he has to run across the street, and there's like gunfire coming down. So you have to remember, we have like M4s, they're all scoped out. We had pretty cool equipment. And so Joe goes running across the street, on leaning against the wall, and I'm not kidding you. I swear to you this is true. Joe's running, and he's firing. I think he had a gangster grip, so it was like this. He's firing, and he like stops right in the middle of the street, in the middle of gunfire, and he like flicks off the enemy. Like, it was insane. I swear to you that's true. Like, that actually happened, and that's him. That's Joe. That's what he would do. He runs across the street, big Viking-looking Joe kicks in the door, pulls this dude out. The award that he ended up getting for valor or whatever wasn't because he flicked off the enemy. It was because he did end up rescuing the dude that was shot, and probably like not gonna say like saved his life or anything. I don't think the straits were that dire, but like went well beyond what he needed. Like, there was no reason for him. Well, not no reason, but it wasn't his place to run across the street. Someone else could have done it, but he did, and that was him. That was just him. The same dude. One other story, not as dangerous and impactful, but just stereotypical Joe, and how like I was like a puppy dog always at his side. We had a mission one day. We were like walking through Ramadi, and it was really early in the morning, so it was dark. And for some reason, I was just like, it was just Joe and me, which isn't smart. Like, they shouldn't leave us alone, because we had bad intentions back then, and we acted on them, and yeah. We were doing something, I don't know why, and we were just walking, and there was a vehicle, like in Iraq, there's lots of cars that are Opals. They're taxi cabs, they're all orange and white, they all look the same, but they're Opals, so you see them all the time. And there was this Opal that was sort of sitting in an awkward position. Maybe we overstated how awkwardly it was sitting, but it was sitting in a position that wasn't normal, and it was a target of opportunity, because we had with us AT-4s, basically bazookas, which we never got to use, right? But or very rarely got to use. But Joe had one, and like, you can't just fire a bazooka, like you have to get authorization, right? So we unless like a situation occurs where you need to use it immediately, but that never happened. So Joe gets on the radio, or I get on the radio, one of us gets on the radio, and we're like, hey, we have a possible vehicle-borne improvised explosive device, this Opal. It's sitting in an awkward position, like, we need to get around it. It's in our course, it's like, it's in our path, we need to get around it. Do we have authority to engage it? Like, if it's a bomb, the best course of action. No, it's funny, because in training before you go to Iraq, they say never shoot an explosive. When you actually get to Iraq, you shoot all of the explosives. It's just what you do. You don't have time to wait for EOD. They take forever. Yeah, EOD being explosive ordnance disposal. If you wait for those dudes, you'll be there for like 3 days. So Joe's like, can we engage it? And given the respect that people have for Joe, they're like, hey, if Joe said it's a VBID, it's probably a VBID. And there was like wires coming out of it. Like, I think maybe I'm filling in the memories again, but yeah. So Joe got authorization to shoot this thing with the AT-4 bazooka, and it's not really a bazooka; it's an anti-tank weapon, but that's what I'm gonna call it. I was right there, and it was crazy. Like, when you're gonna fire this thing, and he knows this stuff. Like, he's really capable. He's like as capable of a military soldier as I've ever met. But he was just wild. So we were not far from this thing, and I ended up going back. Like, I took cover, and he like gets down on his knee, and I don't know how far away he was from this car, like 100 yards, maybe further. I don't know, but he fires it, and the thing just boom blows him back. He ends up like rupturing his kidney or something like that, to where he was like passing blood. He actually had to get evacuated for a couple of days, but that was like typical. That was just the Wild West. It's what you got when you hung out with that dude. It's just the way it was. So yeah, so it's this crazy world where like I end up meeting this guy. We become good friends. I become like enamored with like the caricature of him. And yeah, we made it through our tour. Everything, it was cool. Like, we ended up being, after we left Iraq, we actually ended up going back to, instead of going back to South Korea, we went to Fort Carson, Colorado. We hung out all the time. We were different, though, in a sense. Like, I was a raging alcoholic. I just wanted to drink constantly. And Joe wasn't. he drank, but like he was more responsible in that regard. And we used to talk like in Fort Carson, the 10th Special Forces Group were stationed there, and like I really wanted to go SF, and Joe had been through the pipeline, the training curriculum for SF, and like he was trying to push me to it, and we were both like on the edge. Should we get out? Like the Army sucks, and it was just this weird situation. He was dating a girl in New Orleans. That's when Katrina happened. Like we had to evacuate his girlfriend from Katrina, which is insane. And then like I left the military, and I want to kind of bring this to present day. So the reason that like all of this kind of becomes relevant now, and now like it becomes more sort of emotionally draining for me to think about all of this, because I've changed significantly since I left the military. When I actually left the military, I was super conservative politically, to the point that I actually have met President George W. Bush. I just had a lot of, like, I used to write a really politically conservative blog, and then something snapped in me one day, and it all changed. I became very, like, I'm a pacifist. Like, I have a lot of regret and, like, deep-rooted pain and sorrow about the things that occurred, and I start to realize that a lot of the people that we were fighting in Iraq, at least from my perspective, weren't really our enemy, that there were people who were in a really bad situation, who, though there was enemy there was very bad people. A lot of the people that we were fighting, I think, were people that just were presented with the opportunity of like, hey, here's some money, take some shots at the Americans. We weren't good people either. Like, to think like American soldiers are just super noble and like awesome. I'm not going to get into it now, but like we weren't always the good guys. So I have all that going on, and as I say that, that's the crux of the problem, right? Like, especially now with the political situation as it is, a lot of my friends have gone more that direction, and that's cool. Like, the thing that sucks is like when I see like Make America Great Again, like I get fired up. Like, that's cool. Like, I want to make America great again. Like, I fought for it. But then when I think about it, I'm like, what does that mean? Who's it making it great for, and who is it making it not so great for? Like, did America become to a point where it was great for a certain class of people, and now we want to take it back to where it's only great for a different class and maybe make it worse for these other people? And like, so I look at it in this different worldview, and it just makes for some really uncomfortable situations. Like, you try not to, like, whatever, we all went through like combat together. We should be able to address each other without like politics, and it should be fine. But especially like when drinking starts and like people's real emotions come out, man, these are like violent, crazy, like we have lots of emotional, raw sort of experiences. And it breaks my heart, because like, not because they changed, but because I changed. Like, I'm not ready to kind of reconnect with a lot of them. And it sucks, because like, that's on me. Like, it sucks. Like, there's been reunions I haven't gone to just because like I've become like I feel like I've become a good person. Like, I'm very proud of who I am now, but at the same time, like, I'm not, like, I wish I still held on to some of that raw patriotism and nationalism, and I don't. And like, they're the type of people who have fought. They have sacrificed a lot, and rightfully so. When they think of patriotism, it's like their way or the highway, and that's how it should be. Like they have given up way more than I have. And so like, anyway, I'm digressing, but the point being is like, I've totally lost base with Joe. I haven't talked to him in years, but like when I last saw him on Facebook, I don't think like he would want to, like, I don't know. I'm not sure how you feel about me, right? Like, who knows? And a lot of it's in my own head, right? Like, he could be way more welcoming than what I'm suspecting. But in any case, I continue to this day to have the most admiration for him. I hope he's doing well. I think maybe he had, like all of us, he had demons for a while, I suspect. I know I certainly did. So I hope he's figuring it out. Like, that dude, he's a treasure for the United States. Like, if you're a person who believes in patriotism and nationalism, like, you want him on your side. He's like A Few Good Men. He's one of those people, like, you want him on that wall. And that's where, like, his purpose seemed like was in life. I don't know. But talking about him here allowed me to sort of broadly address a whole bunch of subjects. So I'm happy I did it. Hopefully it wasn't too embarrassing of my fanboyish, how I get like that, but I hope you see why. In future episodes, I have so many more, like, South Korea stories, Iraq. I mean, some of the Iraq stories get pretty morbid. Like, we were crazy. We were pretty crazy. There's also some positive things. Like, I saw some really inspirational things. I have a story. When I was in third ID, one of the most inspiring moments of my life occurred in Baghdad. I had just an inspirational moment that I don't want to give away now. It's for a future episode that really kind of demonstrated the best of humanity. But again, I hope that not all these episodes are just about the military. The last episode, the one I really encourage you to watch, was about depression, PTSD, and stuff like that. I certainly hope you watch that one because for me, it's therapeutic when people watch it. And plus, I'm hoping to find... Well, actually, I wish I would find no one who suffered through the same things, but knowing that they do exist, I hope that we might be able to help each other out. And so much more. I want to talk about, just stupid stuff. I want to talk about the 76ers sometimes. Like, what was Ben Simmons doing yesterday? Who knows? But there's a lot. And we'll talk... I was going to mention, like, growing up in North Dakota, that was another bond that Joe and I had. He grew up in Idaho. I grew up in North Dakota. So, like, we had this small town type thing going on. Tons of stories about North Dakota. But to get all of that, you're going to have to subscribe. So subscribe to the YouTube channel. Hopefully you're enjoying these stories, and they're really helpful for me, so I'm going to continue to tell them. And with that, I'm going to sign off. So thanks for watching.